Hi, folks. It's lovely to be with you again here today. I would love to introduce you to Lee Mangold, PhD. I am so grateful to have him aboard with us today. He has over 20 years of experience in computer and information security across every single industry sector imaginable. Please get this man over a beer as soon as possible, including critical infrastructure, healthcare, defense, intelligence, retail, cyber insurance, and more. Dr. Mangold was a security consultant for the last 10 years, supporting hands on operational and strategic efforts for Fortune companies as well as several high growth startups. Prior to that, Mangold worked as a U.S. defense contractor where he supported IT and security operations for various agencies, including the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, DHS, and federal law enforcement. In addition, he also served as an adjunct professor of cybersecurity at the University of Central Florida and has a highly technical background that includes incident response, forensics, software security, hardware security, and more. And for his sins, he is now the Chief Information Security Officer at Fortress Security. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Lee. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Tara. Happy to be here.
I am absolutely thrilled. We get a chance to talk today about the incredibly fascinating world of supply chain security. This it's so funny. I sit here and think about it. There's a bunch of people that think about information security. We think about like heavy duty, hardcore frontline attacks. Honestly, the thing we all spend our time on every day is vendor contract management.
Yeah.
Genuinely, seriously, it's figuring out, do people know what we're talking about when we say, are you safe and secure? It's a hard world, and we've got a bunch of news that says, in the week this week that says that people have no idea really what we're talking about. But I would love it, Lee, if you would, say a couple words about what the hell you're doing here with us right now.
Yeah.
Just again, honor to have you here, but let's get this kicked off.
Yeah,
What's on
for
your mind?
sure. So really quickly, Fortress Information Security does supply chain risk management. We primarily focus in critical industries. So think, big power energy generation kind of things, and defense. So really our role in all of the world here is that we are doing that whole third party risk management piece for these big suppliers, these big companies, to reach out to their vendors and to assess their vendors. When you look at one of these really large companies and you look at how many vendors they have, we're talking thousands of vendors. So think about it's the cybersecurity problem, like a GRC problem, right? You can start in a spreadsheet and then you outgrow your spreadsheet. And now what do you do, right? So we kind of take a lot of that out of the hands of these bigger customers, and we work with the smaller companies to assess them and to give our customer kind of a good read on where they stand in terms of risk with these companies. So happy to have a conversation about what that means for our customers, but what it also means for what we consider our vendors, right?
Oh yeah. I'm sitting here thinking about a conversation I had with a larger managed service provider in our area last year, and he said, we have to do something other than a highly orchestrated Excel sheet.
Mhm.
And it's so meaningful to hear that. You work with the larger companies, and we work with MSPs and MSSPs that deal with much smaller businesses, which you could sit and think about this as an ecosystem, but honestly, it's like an ocean.
Yeah.
Really, where we've got a bunch of fish swimming around. We got sharks, we got bigger and bigger fish, we got blue whales. You think about it, every piece of this puzzle has a place in the ecosystem, but at the same time, a disruption to that ecosystem, attacks, problems, issues, they ripple up and down that chain all the way through, and something that is systemic affects everybody.
Right.
So, I sit here and think about this, and think about, the much larger companies you work with, and what I would call the companies of companies that we work with. Managed
Mhm.
service providers and managed security service providers often have, a herd, a passel, we're going to call them today, of small businesses that they've
Mhm.
got to manage across a board. And it's not a different problem, but it is certainly a different approach to try to get businesses secure, especially given the fact that even the largest businesses right now are still falling prey to what I would call the single most basic ass attack imaginable, which is
Yeah.
credential stuffing.
Yep.
We're talking about some of the news this week. I think there was a couple of them. Like, a credential stuffing attack is very likely, what in my guess, if there wasn't multi-factor authentication being used on it, what caused the SEC's Twitter account this week to get hacked, right? So how if we can't expect a company like Twitter, X, whatever, I don't care,
Mhm.
or a federal government agency to be able to figure out credential stuffing, why do we think that it's reasonable to expect that, even mid to moderate sized businesses in the US would be able to do any different?
Right. And when you talk about those small businesses, a lot of them are not in IT services, right? This is not stuff that they really think about.
Hmm.
The small part vendor, the O-ring vendor,
Hmm.
right? We're going to run them through a full third-party risk management battery, um, and really their IT is they've got a couple computers that haven't been connected to the internet ever, and they use like Outlook, right? Like there's a huge disconnect there between, I think, really what we look for in terms of supply chain and what we need in a lot of cases. We'll talk about that, yeah, sure, but to your point, it is always the simple stuff, the two-factor problem, right? I remember back when I was working for a cybersecurity liability insurance company. Shout out to my friends at Coalition. Um, but we had one situation. We did in-house IR as well. It was kind of one of our big things at the time. And we got a call from one of our insureds that had an attack. I think it was ransomware going wild. And then we get a call from another insured, and it was almost too similar, too suspicious, too close. And I want to say it happened a third time when we realized their MSP got popped.
Mm.
Their MSP got popped, and that's why they were getting hit. And I believe at the time, I could be wrong, but I believe at the time it was Kaseya, and they didn't have MFA even as an option at the time, as I recall. Um, it's of course what they did afterwards was more high tech, but getting in the initial access was easy. And we see that all the time. And we see also, how does that normally happen? Well, somebody clicked a link in an email somewhere, right?
These are the basic attacks, right? These are the simplest, earliest attacks you could think of. And just if you know where those single points of failure are, it's so easy to pop just about anything. I've used this example so many times for people. For those of you in information security, we all know what a master lock is, right? Most of us in information security understand that if you look at something like this, you understand what the basics of popping a lock like this are. You don't even have to pick it. You certainly don't need the key. You need a simple bypass tool, right? So you pop this thing by pushing the pins up and twisting them sideways. Hell, I don't even do it as fast as most people I know can do it. So when I think about how we think about single points of failure in the early parts of that supply chain, it's discouraging. I'll be straight with you. Like, we're almost at mental health levels of staring at this world and going, what the hell is going on?
Mhm.
And then you see something like, the Hutch Cancer Center here in Seattle this last week dealt with a data breach that had a bunch of their patients and staff getting swatted. And this is just vicious, right? Who are you gonna target? Are cancer patients, right? Like, and what is the earthly point of that? And so I think that that's the top and bottom of something that goes from annoying to devastating and life threatening. And I'm not sure how we address that. I mean, I know we were talking about the alerts problem as well too. I there's a school system that has a security system that monitors student activity, and that student activity, they were doing reports back, and the school and parents were being inundated with notifications about behavior. And I was like, welcome to the world of being a SOC
Yeah.
analyst, right? you know,
Right.
where's our heuristic on this? And at a
Yeah.
certain point, what do? You tune it out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And
what's your
and I
solution?
mean, yeah, I mean that was, they're just now reopening and looking in deeper in the case of the Target breach, right? Where now they're, that was a super alert exhaustion, issue, right? And yeah, no, I mean it's so interesting to see where a lot of these same problems still exist, but how you're seeing them in new industries and new areas that just frankly haven't been prepared for them.
I think so.
And one of the things that you attribute a lot of this to, or I attribute a lot of this to, is a lot of what we've done in IT in general has worked diligently to abstract all that the complexity out, right? So you look at something like AWS, right? AWS has massive infrastructure in the back end, but you don't need to know that infrastructure to spin up a server Windows, server with RDP open and VPN it back to your network, right? You don't need a lot of technical skill. The fact of the matter is, when you do that, you have introduced so much complexity that you have no idea what you introduced, and obviously serious vulnerabilities at that point. But I think that's kind of underscores a lot of the issue of, I worked with a manufacturer a long time ago, and they were looking to do they're trying to be 800 171 CMMC. This is like 5 years ago. We were talking CMMC compliant. They're a large manufacturer, but their systems are still running like Windows 98. Like their Forge, I think, was one on Windows. It was Windows 98, and they had just upgraded to that. And this was like 5 years ago. But it's not stuff that they ever thought about. So you start talking about the complexity of how these things would happen, how you would get into their systems, and it just blows their mind because it's not something they've ever thought about. There's, the simple fact that they've got, 10 plants and they're all VPN together is just in their mind, it was just they were connected. That's all. Mm-hmm. Right. But they didn't really see the complexity involved in that. And I think that's where honestly, good consulting comes in. But also, we're really starting to talk about just good system engineering. It's just not happening anymore. That we're really missing in not just security, but in IT.
I strongly agree. I'm seeing what I'm seeing as a result of being willing to listen to small businesses and solve a problem that MSPs need to solve for them. And one of the key elements that I hear again and again from small businesses and from the MSPs trying to help them is this concept that it revolves around shame. Mm-hmm. And it's a shame that has to do with feeling like this is a key business decision and resource set around cybersecurity. You're correct. And feeling like there is just no hope in learning enough to be able to handle it. Right. For some reason, people aren't treating it like it's a service that they can purchase from a company that can do, external HR or legal or accounting, right? So they think of it as something that they're just supposed to know somehow, and then they feel ashamed about not being able to manage the chain, or they look at it as something that we can get to next week. Well, the problem with cybersecurity is that it is unique among those external services in being something where there is an active adversary. Most of the time when it comes to legal, to HR, to accounting, to janitorial services, the kinds of things that you purchase as service for your business, if it's not a core business product that you're providing, is that these are things where they need to get done. They can be prioritized. They can get handled in order. But there's rarely an actual adversary, right? Most of the time in legal, there's no adversary. You're dealing with contracts and whatever the situation is. But when it comes to cybersecurity, you're dealing with people who are actively trying to harm and hurt you. And that makes it really kind of fundamentally different when it comes to something like insuring a small business. How do you bucket that risk? So I'm super interested in your thoughts as we start talking about supply chain security and the things that are specifically keeping small businesses out of the supply chain, leading up to larger enterprises, the federal government, et cetera.
Right. And I think it's on both sides, right? So it's on the small business side of obviously knowing you need to know your customer, right? And what you're getting into. And then on the large business side too. And I think and that's kind of where I'll start there is, not every vendor you deal with is going to present the same level of risk. If I ask that O-ring vendor to do a 400 question questionnaire and come back and remediate everything to 100%, one of three things will happen. One, they will just withdraw their bid. Two, they will lie. Or three, they're just not going to do it, right? And that's just the reality of it. You look at something like, we all talk about the 853, right, as sort of it's the gold standard for implement this. It's not that easy. And also it's not that cheap. So one of the things that we coach and we work with our customers on, and we approach it different levels with different customers in different ways, is what we call like a risk rank, right? Doing a high level risk rank. Think of it sort of like an intake form. I have this new vendor. This is what they're doing for me. This is what they have access to. And doing some automation in there saying, you know what, I don't care. And I think the easiest way to start there is you start with excluded categories. So, do you really care about your travel agent? I mean, probably not. Well, if you're a travel agent, I'm sorry, we care about our travel agents. But do you care about your data security with a travel agent? Maybe, maybe not. If you don't, why would you work with them to try to have them do a whole questionnaire that is of no importance to anyone, right? I think that's one of the big keys, and I think a lot of companies you can knock out probably, I don't know, 60-70% of your vendor population just by doing a quick risk rank on them, just a quick risk sorting on them. Part of that, though, is going back and reevaluating periodically as well, which is something that is always a pain point. But when you think about a situation where you bring in a third party company and they're going to do some work for you, right? So you give them you give them some source code. They're all open source, or not, but they're all work for hire kind of stuff. They work on their stuff, deliver it back to you. Great. Well, you keep them on contract, and the next thing you know, 6 months later, they're still on contract. They still have like this low risk rank because all you're doing is giving them work for hire kind of stuff. But now they've got an email address on your account. They're in your VPN because now you've added stuff to their statement of work. You push them along the line, and you end up with very invalid risk ranks. So, reassessing those, reevaluating those is still important, or even just expiring them, so you have to redo them. There's lots of ways to do that, but again, I think my big advice there for the companies that have a lot of vendors and that are bugging their vendors with this stuff is think first how much it really matters to you, right? From a security perspective, not from a check the box compliance perspective, but from a security perspective. Because you can always say we sent out a survey, we did our due diligence. But
Right.
what I really care about is if I'm going to send you a big survey, I expect you to have access to big data, and well, not that term, right? But a lot of data. And it's, you represent a big risk to my organization. If that's not the case, go another way.
hmm I strongly agree on that one too. Like we're just going to sit here and agree on just about everything. I will say I
Okay.
disagree with you on one thing, and that
Yeah.
is that is the three options that you gave. You gave an option of, send out a big check before a question. There's either ignore it, lie on it, or withdraw bid. I would argue that there's a fourth option, and the smaller the entity you're dealing with, the more likely this is true. The more likely it is that someone thinks they have handled all of it or assumes someone else is handling the problem. And you get, the CEO of a small business and maybe their external counsel looking at a checklist and going, I mean, I think we have all of this stuff, and they check all of it off and
Right.
they send it in and they shoot it over to their MSP or MSSP and they're like, we got all this handled, right? And the MSP looks at it and goes, well, if we don't, we probably don't want to try to explain to them where we don't and how, because they're not going to understand it anyway. So there's just also sort of like a fourth option. There's like a puddle of ignorance there in a meaningful way, and
Right.
people who don't know what they don't know become that fourth problem there, because that's the most dangerous kind. I personally think it's people who are trying. They're operating in good faith, but they just don't know that they don't know the thing you're talking about. That's dangerous.
Yeah. And we in cybersecurity, we have a language of our own, just like every industry, right? And that language does not always translate. What is an incident in security is not an incident in IT, is not an incident in medicine. It's
Mhm.
not an incident anywhere. It's actually one of those words that actually means something different everywhere you go. So yeah, you look at a control, you should implement XYZ. And if I don't know what that means, but I think I do, I could
Yeah.
unknowingly answer it incorrectly, or even worse, think that I have to, and I've seen this, think that I have to implement something that I actually don't.
Oh yeah. It's dangerous as hell. And so, you gave us kind of a larger company. You're the consumer
Mhm.
of, some of these smaller businesses as you're at a larger business. And folks, for those of you that haven't done a lot of work kind of at the CISO or in the CISO's organization at a larger company, especially around information security, a staggering amount of that work is based around vendor assessment processes.
Yeah.
Is those checklists, is just, the somebody from sales, somebody from partnerships sends you over a company and says, hey, can you make sure it's okay for us to work with these guys? GRC is usually fitting under that CISO, setup. So you're the consumer of a lot of vendor assessment processes, and probably more rarely the producer of them, because you're at a big enough level at this point, that you're not, so you've almost got your game handled at this point. But for somebody who's never tried to do this,
Mm.
imagine, and one of the reasons this company is started, one of the reasons Red Queen Dynamics exists, is because a friend of mine had a 30-person recruiting firm, and she was trying to sell to Facebook. And she called me up and said, "What do I do about this 51-page assessment that I'm looking at right now, so that I can sell into this ecosystem?" And I said, "Okay, well, where's your data security retention policy?" And she said, "Huh?" And I said, "Oh boy." And so, the reason that we exist on a lot of levels is to start by helping answer that question. But for people that have never started this process, who've never seen a vendor assessment checklist and process before, um, can I ask you, Lee, what is as bad as it gets for vendor assessment? What's like the worst thing you've ever seen happen before?
So in terms of receiving an assessment,
Yeah, yeah. Give
and
us the
working with
tea.
clients, like, yeah. Number one, I worked with a lot of small businesses,
Yeah.
and a lot of small businesses, they very much have that mentality in a lot of cases, right? Of, we're scrappy, right? We're going to get something done now, and we'll worry about the fallout later, right? A lot of business, how they run fast, right? And you'll come into an organization, and this wasn't the same manufacturer, this is a different organization, and come in, it's for CMMC. It's 800 171. We're just doing sort of a readiness assessment for them. Well, they had been attesting to being fully compliant for the last 3 years. And I go in, and I told them, you don't want me to write this report. Let's change the engagement. We need to work on remediation. And they couldn't understand. And I started walking through these requirements with them. And I kid you not, if I had to score them based on the scoring, it would have been like 7 out of 110.
Oh my God.
It was kind of atrocious. But really, and I think this is really important here, because I had to work through this with them as well. Is, one thing, if you're an auditor, if you've ever done auditing, like that, the biggest thing that they drill into your head is scoping, right?
Mm.
Understanding your scope, because if you don't understand your scope, like, then everything's in scope, and now you're in trouble. But your scope, when you have one of these contracts come in, is very much dependent on what's written in the contract. So what we'll see a lot, and I've seen this with other vendors, and I actually helped small businesses work through some of this in the past as well, where you'll onboard as a vendor. You're just going to, like, you're going to send me a purchase order. I'm going to make a widget and just send it back to you, right? There's no IT, there's no integration. So in my contract, I've got a statement of work. I'm going to do this stuff and send it to you. And then I get that 58-page questionnaire, right? And it has nothing to do with anything I'm working on. And people freak out. What I've done in the past is, literally, you get the person who just cut the deal with you on the phone, and you say, none of this is in scope for what we're doing. I don't, I'd be happy to share the information with you,
Yeah.
but it's irrelevant for you.
Mhm.
How can we work this out? Because this is a significant effort of doing this. And what I have found, at least half the cases, half the time they'll say, well, it's just our procedure. Sorry, there's nothing I can do about it. And the other half of the cases, they say, yeah, I don't know why they sent you that. Don't worry about that.
Mhm.
Right. And then all of a sudden, you've got some exemption, and that's not always rock solid, right? But you now have some sort of an exemption, because honestly, it wasn't in your contract. It wasn't in scope. Right. And Tara, I'm sure you've seen how many contracts do you see, like, before redlining, they want you to notify them on everything.
Mhm.
It says, if somebody sneezes behind their keyboard and that's an incident, we need to know about it. And that's not what they mean, but that's what's written in the contract. And you get back to them and say, well, okay, redline, in scope services. And they're like, oh yeah, no, that's what I meant. Check the box. Well,
Yeah.
that was just a massive lift off your shoulders for asking a question, essentially.
That might be one of the greatest pieces of advice I would give to to a managed service provider. They've got small businesses asking, hey, fill us out this vendor
Yeah,
assessment process, this checklist, make sure we're good to go for this thing. I wonder how many MSPs and MSSPs ask the question of those small businesses just doing their business.
right.
Did you ensure that there's a scope to the contract that you want to get signed, that there's some kind of scope here, because otherwise you're going to be on the hook for a lot of stuff contractually that you can't handle and we don't have in our contract to provide you. So I'm fascinated by this because the more I get into this ecosystem, and I've been in here for years at this point, and there is no bottom to this well, right? Like I've stared into the abyss and I'm still diving. And the more I get into this, the more I understand the the assumptions around where contracts are supposed to go, as opposed to what's actually being written down on paper, gets bigger the further away you get from a larger company. The trust level between a small business and some of the people that they do business with, the service providers they work with, the assumptions grow larger the smaller the entity you're working with. And so the process of supply chain management seems to me, on a lot of levels, to be removing that the gray area around what the actual expectations are versus the paperwork that's been signed. And I think one of the problems here is that gray area doesn't just house the uncertainty around what the actual services are, it houses the lack of knowledge about what's needed to provide them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you just, there's so, you could just come up with example after example, right? Of, I make light bulbs.
Mhm.
You're buying light bulbs. You don't need to know my disaster recovery policy,
Right.
right? Like,
Yeah.
how is that going to help you at all? And if you do, well, now I have to go spend money.
It's like the company that was manufacturing the bolts for the door plugs for 737, the 737s that Alaska's grounded. Or the I love a couple of folks' example on this, the O-rings for the Challenger. Knowing everything about the O-ring manufacturer's disaster recovery processes would not have saved the space
No,
shuttle.
no.
Knowing what they had put in place for quality control in a different and meaningful way and requiring a stop of work, that makes far more sense, right? That's in scope work. So on a lot of levels, as a small business, you don't need to be providing, a massive description of your BCDR because you're making widgets, right? I had a one of our or my good friends was running a legal firm, and he wanted, with his, I think, 35-person law firm, he wanted to provide local services to a very large security corporation, like a very big one.
Mm.
And he got a checklist back, and it required that he do a SOC 2 Type 2 for his law firm, and he'd never done it before. He texted
Mhm.
me, and he was like, "What the hell is this?"
Yeah.
And I said, I think it's very likely that they've gotten across the board. They're waiting for people to push back on them if there's an issue, but they don't need to know your BCDR. You're a law firm, right? Like they need to know your data privacy processes. Why don't you text them and find out, message them in some way and just say, hey, we don't have the bandwidth to do this. And I also told him, he was like, can we get a SOC 2 Type 2 from you? And I was like, I mean, sure, $165,000 sound good to you? And he was like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
I said, well, the engineer's time for a period of time. And I said, instead, text them back and find out if you can give them the NIST CSF SMB 7621 form, which is the
Mhm.
small business guide to
Yep.
cybersecurity. And he texted me back and he said, yeah, you just saved me $164,000. And I said, fine, you owe me a burger. I still haven't been paid back on that burger, but yeah, damn it. But this is the question. Sometimes large businesses over ask for what they need too, right?
Right.
You don't want to consume all that.
Right. And that's honestly one of the niches that we fill at Fortress, is not
Hmm.
just doing that, but it's that idea of even the big companies that we do care about, even the big critical vendors that we do care about. Um, what do you do when you get all the data, right? How do you analyze that and say, okay, they're good enough, right? Do you require 100% compliance? Because there are very few situations where 100% compliance is actually happening, right? So, um, that's one of the niches that we try to fill, is we try to pull all that together and to help contextualize it to your organization.
Hmm.
Not a lot of companies do that, and it's hard. It's a
Hmm.
lot of work.
It's a profound amount of work, and there's something to be said for being honest about the fact that there's no such thing as perfection. You know what? I don't even know if I can do this. I wonder if I could share a screen or throw up an image of like literally our NIST CSF compliance right now. I'll have to ask some folks about it, but I'm actually not sure how to do that. We'll see if we can figure it out at some point here. If I had like a screenshot or something like that. But I think one of the problems that we often have on our own tool
Hmm.
on our own tool, I look at our compliance, and we are at 95.3% perfect green compliance with NIST CSF, two compensating controls, and about 3 points that we need to fix, right? Like somebody answered a question, was like, oh, I did a thing the wrong way. I now get to go back and fix this in my small business, right? Red Queen Dynamics is still technically a small business, even though we're busy providing this product and serving. It's still my responsibility as the owner of a small business to go through and remediate these issues as we go forward. So yeah, I've got I actually have it up right now. I think we could probably get it going. I wonder how I can actually do this. Oh,
Yeah, well,
maybe it's the present
that's probably it. I was gonna
share
say while you're
screen. Oh, there we
talking
go.
about that, like it's interesting. I still answer surveys.
Uh-huh.
I and my team still have
Oh, there it
surveys
is.
that we get from our customers, right?
Totally.
That we have to answer. So
So
it doesn't stop.
yeah, I'm actually showing this right now. This is us internally. I'm showing the truth, right? Like the frameworks that we're on target for, that our own compliance journey. Like it matters a lot that this kind of stuff is there, that it's meaningful, and that we be honest with ourselves about. I'm not sure we got it. You can throw us back up on the screen now. I'm done there. But I think it's meaningful that we say, look, we're an excellent expert cybersecurity company. And if we're not discovering tiny holes we need to fix on an ongoing basis in our own security, how the
Right,
hell are we going to have any moral authority, much less financial and
right.
fiduciary responsibility, telling other companies if they're on track? Tell me right now, Lee, as the CISO of Fortress Security, that you're 100% compliant on every framework you're supposed to be right
Oh,
now.
we are 100% compliant on every framework we're supposed to be.
Exactly, right? And that
Yeah, yeah.
that
I
right
mean,
there is it. Yeah.
and it's interesting, right? Like there's especially the larger the company you get and the more
Mhm.
kind of diverse, the more industries you fall into, the more frameworks you have to follow, obviously, right?
Mhm.
The more requirements you get. Um, there's we don't need to get into the compliance versus security debate here, but companies don't very often, at least our size, don't very
Mhm.
often get shut down because you weren't compliant with a security rule or something like that, right? You could get shut down when you have a massive data breach and your customers don't trust their data with you anymore,
Mhm.
right? So it becomes a risk management problem. That's where as you move higher up that chain, right? Those things that you really have to think about. It. Yeah, we're going
Mhm.
to have breaches. We're going to have business email compromises. We're going to have, somebody's going to download something on their browser, right? Like there's going to be silliness like that. We're protecting the best we can, but we know that stuff's going to happen. Um, so when you come around to compliance, compliance for me, well, I hate to say it,
Mhm.
is always going to take backseat to security. And if you do security right, compliance is still annoying, but it's a lot easier because if you've done it right, you've done it right. There's, a lot of these frameworks are not very prescriptive. There's a
No,
lot.
they're not.
Yeah, I think HIPAA is HIPAA still 8 character or 8 character passwords is required.
It is. I'm
Yeah,
gonna reread it again. PCI is just now coming up with version 4 this year. This whole thing.
yeah.
Absolutely, like these frameworks. Yeah, exactly. I love this question that we're getting right now from an audience member, which is it's an MSP that's asking this question. Um, they work with a small dental group, and how do I know who to talk to about what I need to protect? I'm genuinely curious. Like if you were
Yeah.
me, or no,
Mhm.
you know what? Actually, Lee, put yourself in the seat of that contractor you were.
Yeah.
You're talking to a company of companies, an MSP with 60 small businesses. One of them is a dental group. How do I make sure I'm giving that dental group the right answer?
Yeah. I mean, I think interestingly, sadly, I think is really probably the answer
Oh
here.
boy.
But
Okay.
interestingly, the HIPAA security rule is not hard, right? If you look from a security perspective, privacy rule is a little more complicated, but the HIPAA security rule is not very complex, and meeting the requirements for that is not very hard. I think the first thing you do is in that particular case, it does become a sales lead or a leader for the sales. You have to go in understanding what that security rule is and what services you can provide to cover down on them. But also important to know, what is PHI, what defines PHI, and then where does it live? And that is your, and then of course all the policy around it and how do you, there's a longer tail to it, but that I think is your number one step, right? I worked with a lot of medical offices, a lot of doctors' offices. Right. The smallest I think I worked was like it was like 3 nurses or 3 staff and a doctor, all the way up to small medical centers. And the smaller ones, you walk in and they've all got the foot warmer. They've all got this this electronic medical record system on a box. Under the thing, they've got some MSP that installed it for them probably 10 years ago. And then they said, well, we don't want to pay for MSP anymore. We got what we need, right?
Right.
And the receptionist uses literally, it happened twice, literally uses it to keep her feet warm because it exhausts. It's like, an old machine just burning power.
And that can't wear out.
Yeah, exactly. The fans are just cooking. And, in those cases, you look at them and it's like, okay, well, what's your actual risk here, right? If all the data is right there and there's no way to get to it, let's think about what that means, right? Let's think about it from a real, can't get in. Well, 9 times out of 10, there was like, oh, well, the doctor wanted to get into it. So we opened up RDP to that box, and yeah, it happened a lot. Right. And,
right.
And sometimes you can make progress and sometimes you just make sure they have your information for incident response. It's unfortunate, but yeah, I mean, back to the, the question of, what do you do first? Understand what the doctor doesn't understand, which is the technical side of how you would scope and secure that data.
Right. And who is the person who gets to write that policy document? I've been the person writing that policy document before, and who gets to write that policy document and still look at themselves in the mirror the next morning, right? That's the challenge, because you want it to be honest, you want it to be truthful, but you also want it, to reflect the fact that there are limitations really here. I remember talking to, for an organization like that, I remember talking to one of our MSPs, one of our clients, and one of the things that they had experienced as a challenge was that they had kitted out, a local business, a logistics business, with the laptops and everything like that, set them up on the accounts and everything like that, for 6, 8, 9 months after that, everything was hunky dory. And then they just stopped getting paid by this client. And, they called them up, like, hey, we should have a $3,000 invoice. Any problems with the credit card? And they were like, yeah, we just decided to not use you anymore. And they said, oh gosh, so sorry, was there a problem? And they said, no, we just don't see any real reason to use you anymore, or anybody, because we already have our computers. And we know how to get into stuff now. And so they said, we don't need any of the stuff you're providing. And it's difficult to convey what having like kind of a guardian at the gates means to an organization like that, depending upon their risk level. It's hard.
Yeah, and unfortunately, stories like that are what lead to the the sales culture of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Right.
Yeah.
Just sell with fear and they'll always buy, right? Like, it's not always true, right? But it's also not really the truth in a lot of cases. There's so much, there's so many little things that companies need to be doing. There's so many little things that like big companies need to be doing, like forcing multi-factor authentication, Twitter. But there's a lot of these just basic controls, and people generally just don't realize how they don't realize necessarily how easy some of this is to attack. And when you look at, you've got okay, well, I'm going to enable multi-factor authentication on my email. Surely there's more I should do. It's like, well, yeah, there is, but like 99.8% of the attacks on your email account are going to be because you don't have multi-factor authentication. So cover that down first, right? So, I think I know I'm preaching to the choir, right? But there are those little things that you have to cover down on, and they matter, but they're not the full story.
This goes to this question, of small versus large businesses, especially when it's feeding up almost ultimately in a lot of cases into DoD or larger companies that have, these huge requirements. And there's a real push by USG to start competing and opening up contracts to multiple kinds of vendors. Those small vendors are now asking questions. Somebody is asking this question now: how do you compete with those DoD contractors
Right.
when they have money for security? How do you get into that supply chain? But now, this small vendor, this 3PL, this logistics firm, a
Right.
trucking company with 20 people outside of Iowa, how do they compete in terms of these security requirements? Is there a way to frame that, or are they just SOL?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a sliding scale, right? And with CMMC or 800-171, that is going to be interesting. They've been trying to get this out the door for many, many years now, and that's one of the big criticisms right now of, yeah, we understand that it's national security, right? So on one hand, we get that, right? This is important stuff we're trying to secure, but on the other hand, how are you going to bring that small vendor in with innovative technology, right? Innovative processes? How are you going to bring them in to actually work in your environment? So it depends on the sponsoring organization and what kind of risk they're willing to take in a lot of cases. And there's so many caveats with that all over the place. But CMMC is one of those areas that is concerning a lot of people, concerning us as well. But if you look at that, and then let's look at even a worse situation, FedRAMP, right?
Oh God.
If you're going to
Set
be
up. I gotta find salt to throw over my shoulder. I gotta
right,
break something over
right,
here. Like toss my cat over a chair. Like, oh God,
yeah, it's
you
it's it's a
invoked it.
whole thing. It's a whole thing. Like, look how long the FedRAMP program's been out and how many vendors they actually have, right?
517, if I recall.
Yeah, and
I'm not joking. I think
yeah.
it was 517 that I just read one of the news releases. Yeah.
So the number one buyer of goods and services in the world can only work with 517 cloud providers, cloud service providers of some sort. That seems weird to me,
Yeah, it
but
seems shitty to me.
yeah.
Genuinely. It
Well,
seems it
different
seems
words.
problematic, unfair, anti-competitive. And then you got like half of those contractors getting passes on some of the stuff that they fail on for CMMC because they're already in the system, and the energy it takes to get them in there is so vast
Yep.
that it's better just to give them a pass than try
Yeah.
to make them stand to those standards. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. It's tough, and it's unfortunately DoD acquisitions folks are going to have to feel the pain, and program managers are going to have to feel the pain for a little bit before they really start having. They have to have the ammunition to push back
They do.
and say, this is stopping us from doing XYZ because we need this. And, for all their faults, the DoD and all of them they're doing conceptually what they know is right, right? It is national security, right? Why should we compromise on national security? I get that. I don't necessarily have the answer for them,
I don't
but,
either. I don't either. I
but
know it's not I know it's not stopping services because you don't know what your IT provider is doing for you anymore. Like somebody was like, just stopping services. It sounds like stopping taking your meds because your symptoms went away. Like day 4 of a
right.
10-day penicillin course or something.
Yeah.
Like that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's true, right? And 100% compliance is not the answer either.
Right.
Right. And
I
that's
genuinely think that. I do.
yeah, and that's how they compete, right? That's how a lot of these companies try to compete. And while we have the best security around because of X, you're not going to find a company out there that hasn't had some sort of data breach of some kind. They might not know
Absolutely.
about it, but they have in some way or another, right? And I think that's really the problem. We set this. There's you mentioned it earlier. There's like the morality of the high ground of like we've
Mhm.
got to be perfect all the time, and perfect doesn't exist.
It does
Right.
not. It
So
does not. Yeah.
yeah, so let's talk about security the way that we know it should be talked about. This is risk management.
Yes. It is, and it's the same thing as health, honestly. You are never going to be perfect when it comes to your own health. You're never going to be somebody who does everything exactly all the right way, partially because a bunch of the experts disagree about what constitutes doing
Right.
health correctly for an individual person. There may be some general guidelines, like you're probably not supposed to eat nothing but Twinkies.
Mhm.
But there are a lot of businesses out there that are subsisting on a diet of burgers and Twinkies, and saying, hey, at least I'm living and I'm saving a bunch of money because this is cheaper, right? But long term, that's just not good for your waistline or your bottom line, right? It ends up not being something that is sustainable in the long term. It's something you have to do that's cheap and terrible right now, and you try to get yourself out of that situation instead of accepting it and staying at that level,
Yeah.
right? Where you're not treating yourself and your company the right way by doing that. It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
And so I guess I have a couple of last questions I always like to ask people, but
Mhm.
honestly, Lee, I guess when I think about this process and I think about the people that we work with and the people you work directly with large organizations.
Mhm.
And our clients are service providers that
Mhm.
work with those small businesses. You know, we give them the tool to do it. I'm not going to go into it right now because I don't have to, but I mean, you can literally see what we do. This is an ongoing process.
Right.
If you were going to tell an MSP or MSSP to ask one question of like there's 60 small businesses, it's about logistics, professional firms, accountants, lawyers, right? The kind of people that we work with. If you're going to tell MSPs to ask all their people one question to get them ready to go or to see if they're ready to go,
Right.
to get into a larger supply chain, try to sell up to enterprise, to USG, to DoD, what's the question you would want those small businesses to get asked at the beginning of their journey?
I think one of the single most telling questions you can ask is, what is the most important data that you have?
Damn. I'm going to The keys to the kingdom question. All right.
If you don't know what it
Your crown
is,
jewels.
you damn sure don't know where it is.
Mm.
And if you
If you
don't know
don't know what it is,
where
that's
it
fair.
is, you can't answer any questions about how it's protected.
Where are your crown jewels? I love it. I love it so much. I love that we got people that even want to stay in this field. Hi, Mary. Thanks for asking the question. You know, education and security and too old and too lazy to keep up with the tech. Girl, I am here with you, right? I'm so tired.
Hmm.
You know, like open some external accounts and stuff like that. How do you see, Lee? How do you see the role of education in security? Do you think there's a way to change how we talk about this, starting at the level where we're putting people through the meat grinder of a CS or a infosec education and dumping them out into SOC and analyst roles to get them ready? Like what do we do?
Yeah, it's funny. I literally just had I would say a conversation, but a rant last night with a friend of mine, and we were talking very much about this. I put a lot of value in education. I did a lot of education, so there's probably some bias there, right? But I put a lot of value in that because what I see from a degree is not necessarily that you came out, you're a CS student, so you know all about computers, because that's not true. But the value of the number one, you stuck with the program that you're passionate about. You got through to the end. And you know what? I know a few things about college students. You're a lot farther more ahead understanding how to break down problems, requirements decomposition. I'm going to get this assignment from my boss slash teacher, and I have to do it to this standard. And this is what it looks like, right? Seeking what good looks like and getting things done. So I think there's a lot of value there that's not a value that you were tested on, right? But I see the huge value there. Where I think we have a long way to go is, I think a lot of cybersecurity programs are not necessarily, they're teaching SOC analyst kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're teaching the very high level, what I need to know to understand that networks exist and that these things touch and these are exposed, right? They're not really diving super deep. And of course, if you ask any student, we have under my nonprofit, Florida Cyber Alliance, we do our cybersecurity summer camps, right? And they're always interested in like, oh, what do I do? Oh, can we learn how to hack here? So, I mean, okay, cool. I'll show you how to send a phishing email and get somebody's password. But that's what a lot of programs try to bring you in with, right? We're going to make you this elite hacker guy. The reality of it is, like we talked about at the very beginning, if you don't understand the core concepts, if you don't understand the system that you're working in, and largely if you don't understand IT, you're gonna have a very hard time in cybersecurity. There will always be a place for you. There will always be a thing you can do, right? But if you want to be a pen tester, you know what? If you don't know any languages, any software, programming languages, as a pen tester, I'm not sure what exactly you're pen testing, right? Unless unless you have a lot of IT background, you're very niche, right? But that there is a lot of education that needs to be brought together and more focused into not necessarily a cybersecurity degree, so to speak, but a cybersecurity field, which does include IT. It does include systems engineering. It does include cybersecurity. Most programs aren't doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and physical security and all of the things that we consider to be part of this field. I mean, it is an integrated whole. It's huge. And this this is a field that we're going to be in for a long time, and managing how we handle it, managing education, the inflow of people with enthusiasm, and managing the people who bump up against our field, small businesses,
Mhm.
people who see what we do and they're either immediately feel shamed or enthusiastic about how this is presented to them. And that demand for perfection goes so far to creating that sense of shame,
Yeah,
right? That
yeah.
thing where you don't want to ask for help and you think you've probably got it under control. I love Jay Beal here. First of all, oh my God, we got a luminary on board. Hey, what's up, Jay? So loving this metaphor about stopping the antibiotics because the symptoms went away. We really, really, really got to think about the long-term health of the whole ecosystem, and that doesn't mean it's maybe like the terrible ingredients that go into food instead that's almost hidden, right? We got to think about how we put this all together, how we think about an entire field's health. And I think it matters that we have to forgive ourselves for being not perfect. And that extends from the fact that I did not do my yoga with Adrienne this morning all the way up to, continuing to have a good life and a meaningful and peaceful one in this field. I mean, it's hard. Are you doing okay? Genuinely?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work and a lot to keep up with.
Yeah.
I think for me personally, and the only way I think you can really survive is you have to compartmentalize certain things, right? It's really easy to look at all the latest breaches and all the world's falling down and think, oh my God, I'm never going to get my hands around all of this. Which, fun fact, you will never get your hands around all of it. But being able to kind of stop and recenter on kind of the purpose of why you serve the organization you serve, right? That's a key life lesson for everyone, security or not, right? Is what is your purpose in that organization? What is your purpose in any organization you're in? For me, I know what my purpose is at my company, and my purpose is number one to secure the company, and if that means making decisions that people are unhappy with, but I know they're the right decisions, I'm going to fight for it and I'm going to do it. There's it also, in the same token, excludes you from, having to worry about a lot of stuff. Be aware of things, be aware of everything going on. But, am I worried about every data breach? No. Am I worried about all the new technology and software coming out? No, not really. Am I worried about, can my team effectively execute and use the tools and technologies that they have at hand and they have the training they need? Yeah, that I worry about. That's the stuff that's important. You hit the target, you hit the close target, right?
Mm. I love that. I love that so much. All right. That's really meaningful. I like the fact I love my job. I like the fact that people like getting on phone calls with me now. I mean, I've been in corporate cybersecurity before, top level executive before. People didn't like getting on phone calls with me. Because you run offensive security, you run data privacy. All of a sudden, people are a little bit they're scared to get on calls with you. They're glad when they get off, and they don't like anything you have to say. Now people are like, oh my God, you heard me, you understand my problem, and their faces light up. And
Right.
as a nerd, that's new for me, and I love that.
Yeah.
I really love that. So last question, before we get to kind of the wrap up here, is Lee,
Mm.
if you didn't do this job and you were going to do anything else on earth, don't worry so much about money.
Yeah.
Assume you're not like a
Yeah.
space billionaire or anything like that. But um, I want you to tell me, what is the job that you would be doing otherwise? Like the career you would have had. I've heard blacksmith, international diplomat, starship captain. I've heard a bunch of stuff. Like you can go with just about anything. If you were going to do any job other than this, what calls to your heart? What do you want to do?
It's funny. So you're gonna laugh. All through high school, all through for a couple years of college, my desire, my passion was getting into emergency medicine, and I didn't do it. And the reason I didn't do it was because I didn't want to go to school that long. Yeah. 30 years later. Yeah.
Okay,
So
that
now
makes me laugh. Okay.
Now you call me doctor, but I can't write you a prescription, right? Like so.
I love that. So many people in our field also really feel a call towards emergency medicine. I can think right off the top of my head, like Jake Williams used to be an EMT. Matt Blaze was a paramedic. Tilda Longrim on our team is an EMT and first responder. So many people like Deviant. My spouse teaches stop the bleed classes and does first response. So many of us are called to that, and I wonder how much of that has to do with our Jones for incident response. Maybe a
Yeah,
little bit.
you know, yeah,
Yeah.
wanting to help people, heal people, and be the
Yeah.
savior, right? Like
Be the
that's
savior. Run into the burning building. Yeah.
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 Well,
Mm,
I'm
that's
tired of
funny.
running into burning buildings. So,
Oh,
message
you and me both.
for all of my folks: if you could stop clicking on things, that'd be super. Like
That'd be super.
appreciate it.
How can people get a hold of you if they want to talk with you? At Fortress Security, just by
Yeah,
yourself. Definitely throw up for the Florida Cyber Alliance, wonderful organization besides Orlando. What do people want to? How should people reach out to you?
yeah. Reach out to me through LinkedIn. I will. I endeavor to read all of my messages as long as they are with from not accounts that were created 6 minutes earlier. You can reach me there, leemangold.com, fortressinfosec.com. I'm kind of all over the place. So yeah,
Mm. This was joy-filled. Lee, thank you for your time. I hope everybody
absolutely.
has a wonderful day out there. I am really appreciative of this. Lee, have a wonderful, wonderful day. Folks, thank you so much for being here today. You'll see us this next week with Chris Cochran. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.